And now we'll get to the main part of our agenda, which is to really start the discussion of our post-election debrief. And first up, I'd like to introduce David Bush from the Income Security Advocacy Center. He's going to speak for a few minutes, and then after that, Deena Ladd from the Workers' Action Center will speak for a few minutes. But while they're speaking, we have a beautiful slide loop that we'll cycle through while Dave and Deena are speaking, and so you can be reminded about all the amazing things we did together. So I'll pass it over to Dave, and we'll get the slides up, and take it away, Dave.
Great, thank you for having me. So yes, I just want to talk a little about this election and the election outcome. And obviously, I think we can say this is not the outcome of the election that we would like. But we should dig a little deeper and to understand what happened and why it happened. And I think the first thing that is noteworthy about this election is the low voter turnout. Only 43% of the electorate came out to the polls to vote, and that is the lowest in Ontario's history. The 2018 election was actually one of the higher voter turnout elections in the last 30 years. And if you compare the two, in that 4 years, we saw 1.2 million people who came to the polls and voted in 2018 stayed at home in the 2022 election. And so the outcome of that was that the Ford Conservatives, they won a second majority. They increased their seat count. They got 83 seats. They won seats in Brampton, in Windsor, in Timmins, in York Southwestern. And they won about 40%, and we'll see that in the news stories. 40% of the people who did show up to vote voted for the Conservative Party. But what's less apparent is that 415,000 people who voted for the Conservatives didn't vote for the Conservatives in 2018. So they lost over 400,000 votes compared to the last election. And if we put it all together, only 17% of the electorate, all the people who could have voted, only 17% voted for Ford's Conservatives. And so it's worth asking, why did this happen? And I want to take us back to something that Sarah had mentioned earlier, which was last year around this time, in the spring of 2021. Ford's approval ratings from January 2021 to June 2021 were the lowest of his administration outside of the teacher strike pre-pandemic. And it was at this moment when we were in the second and third wave of the pandemic, and workers were dying, people were dying, and there was really intense lockdowns, and people were scared and wanted access to the vaccine. And most importantly, people wanted access to legislated paid sick days because employers were demanding that workers go into work, go into Amazon factories and go into warehouses and go into service sector jobs without access to proper adequate legislated paid sick days. And instead, Doug Ford didn't legislate paid sick days. He made this move and he made an announcement where the Conservative government said, we're going to close public parks. We're going to empower the police with new powers to stop people and give them extra police powers. And that's how we're going to get out of the pandemic. And there was a moment over the weekend where there was huge outrage at this because it was so obvious that what Ford needed to do was to legislate paid sick days for all workers. And that by the end of that weekend, the Ford government made a special announcement. Doug Ford, who was basically in hiding, he was like at some cottage somewhere, came out at what Sarah said, cried on TV and then said, I'm going to legislate three temporary paid sick days. Now, they did not want to do that. And that was the result of public pressure, of the popularity of paid sick days, of movement organizing to demand paid sick days. And it was something that showed us that movement pressure worked. When we organize, we can win things, and even from a conservative government. And it's at this moment, I think the conservatives were realizing that they were losing popularity, and that if they wanted to get elected again in the following year, in 2022, that they were going to have to reorient around these issues, that they couldn't just simply be the bad guys on decent work issues, that decent work issues had become and been made popular through movement organizing. And so they need to be seen as taking action on that and saying, we're going to be proactive on workers' issues. And in the last year, Doug Ford, who ran on making Ontario open for business in 2018, ran really in 2022 on working for workers. The Conservatives passed a number of seemingly pro-worker pieces of legislation called the Working for Workers Act 1 and 2. They raised the minimum wage to $15, something that Doug Ford had long opposed. They had brought in the 3 temporary paid sick days. They put in regulations on recruitment agencies, and they, made some splashy announcements about gig workers and rights for temp workers. They raised pay for PSWs and signed the child care agreement. A lot of what they did wasn't adequate, but what they tried to do was make it sound like they were the voice for workers. And what we can say, I think, with this low voter turnout and the fact that Doug Ford ran on working for workers is that he does not have, and the Conservatives do not have, a mandate to attack public services. They do not have a mandate to attack workers' rights. And this is something that they did immediately. They attacked both public services and workers' rights in 2019 and 2018. This is the first, 2018 and 2019. This is one of the first things that they did. They rolled back paid sick days. They attacked them, put the pause on the minimum wage. They cut public sector jobs. And they have no mandate to do that this time. And I think that we have to keep saying that to ourselves and saying that to the communities that we're organizing in, and repeating that and building around that. And I will say just a couple of things and then pass it over to Deena, which is, kind of thinking about the low voter turnout. And I think this is something that all of us know and have experienced and understand through canvassing and talking to people in our communities and our workplaces, is that workers were hit really hard by this pandemic, and especially low wage workers, who we know are disproportionately racialized and disproportionately racialized women. And over the last 2 years, there's been a heightened sense of insecurity around jobs, around job loss. Workers have lost their jobs. They've seen their hours been cut. They've seen their income disappear. They've had to struggle for proper access to PPE. They've had to struggle to make sure their employers are enforcing workplace health and safety. They've had to struggle through access to vaccines. They've had to struggle through the ups and downs of childcare through the pandemic, through various lockdowns. They've had to struggle through navigating elder care, about dealing with their own personal sickness, about the lack of adequate paid sick days in their own life and workplace, and the mountain of stress that comes with living and working through the pandemic. And I can't overemphasize that. There's just so many things through this pandemic. And on top of that, we're seeing in this last for 6 months, a rise in cost of living that's really, really hurting workers, from the rent checks to the price of food in the grocery store. And workers feel abandoned by this government, and they feel abandoned by the political system, and isolated. They feel isolated and alone. And many workers are angry. And I think that that's very justified, and they're exhausted and they're demoralized. And I think workers, in part, they voted with their feet and felt like that change was unlikely to come through this election, and they stayed home. But that doesn't mean that workers don't want change. And to me, this is the lesson of why movements are so important. The bosses, they want us divided. They want us to feel alone. They want us to feel weak and small. And movements are about building the power to change the world around us, to fight for needed demands like paid sick days and a higher minimum wage. But they're also about helping us to connect people and to make people feel less isolated, less alone, to make us feel strong and big, and make us feel like that we can build up our collective capacity and our confidence to not only fight, but actually win. And that is the power of what happened last spring. And that is the power of, I think, things that we've been able to accomplish in the Justice for Workers movement and the decent work movement, is that when we fight and we organize together, we can actually advance struggle and change people's lives. And we need to keep doing that. And so I'm going to pass it over to Deena.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing okay. So I have to say, I'm really relieved that the elections are over. It's been, we've been trying to organize around the elections for the past 2 years during this pandemic, and it's been brutal, right? We knew that we would have a hell of a fight on our hands to get rid of Ford. That was before the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, obviously, I think we started to see this incredible sort of coming together of people to try to start to think through what was it that our communities and and workers and our kids and everybody in our lives needed, and that this government was obviously failing. And so I guess I just want to talk about sort of like the organizing aspect of what happened, and about why, even though I've had this, dread in my stomach for the last 2 years heading to the elections, and this kind of feeling that when we wanted to get out there and start to organize in September of last year in 2021, and then the next wave hit, and then we sort of got our training out there and started to get out there again, and then Omicron hit, and then it just felt like we were navigating these incredible obstacles, and of course people being sick. And so I think the thing is that one of the reasons why I'm just glad the election is over in some ways is because I felt like we were completely, we ran out of time. If we'd had another 2 or 3 months, I think, to kind of, be able to kind of do the deep organizing. Well, not that deep organizing can happen in 2 or 3 months. I'm talking about sort of extending the kind of organizing that we've been doing in communities. But we needed more time. We didn't really get out and be doing in-person contact until probably March. And at that point, we were still pushing it, right? I mean, we had over 300 people go through training in March, and still we knew hundreds of workers were reluctant to come to in-person training. And it felt that we just didn't have enough time in terms of the forces against us. So the other reason why I'm relieved is because in some ways we just have to get on and do the organizing that we need to do, because of all the reasons what Dave and Sarah and others have been talking about, that like in some ways, we had such an incredible, I don't know about you, but any of the leafleting that I did in many different communities and conversations that I had, there was such incredible support. Like we had at one of our trainings, at a number of our trainings, we had workers coming from Windsor, from Ottawa, from St. Catharines, from Hamilton, from Kitchener-Waterloo, from Brampton. And there was such an excitement and interest in the demands of the campaign. So to me, it was like there was no question that what we were fighting for, because it came out of workers' desires of what they had suffered through the pandemic, that it made sense. That, you know, I was talking to Pam this morning in another meeting, and I was saying, like, you know, when we're out in Brampton, people would just be like, yeah, whatever, $20, you know, an hour, give me that petition, let me sign it right now. And I mean, I didn't even like get the full sentence out of my mouth. So I think that any of us who did any of the outreach on the streets and did some of the trainings, we knew that there was incredible resonance with the campaign, with the demands, with what we were fighting for. And it actually, people were feeling really inspired and hopeful and very excited about that. So to me, I'm holding on to that. I'm holding on to that in terms of how that moves our movement and our organizing forward. And so I think that, you know, we also have to remember that, you know, we didn't have enough time. The pandemic was hellish to organize around. But still, even though we were dealing with the fact that, you know, 5 people couldn't even be in a room together, we still achieved a lot. And I, you know, I know that you've heard some of this before, but I think it's important to recap so that we don't go home depressed and feel like, you know, life is over and we should just huddle in a corner with a blanket over our heads and hopefully in 4 years things will change. I mean, you know, I totally understand that desire. I mean, I'd like to just have a bit of a nap myself, but I don't think I'm going to do it for 4 years. Anyway, so I think it's important to remember that, one, we did win the $15 minimum wage for federally regulated workers, as well as getting a cost of living increase at the federal level. So now that the current federal level is at $15.55 an hour, which is really amazing, given the fact that, like, just even 6 months ago, we had 8 provinces that still have in some ways minimum wages of less than $15 an hour. So despite this incredible, you know, Doug Ford's hatred of the $15 and how, you know, it was very super clear in 2018. He was going to, you know, get rid of the $15. He was going to do this, smash workers, you know, get rid of us all because we're all a bloody pain in the ass and all that. But what a change of tune, right? Now he's like a friend of the blue collar worker, likes those of us who shower at night now instead of in the morning. And so, you know, I mean, what kind of bullshit is this, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I was expecting his nose to grow a foot. Anyway, so this way he sort of like says, oh, I love unions, I love workers, like, you know, as if, you know, we're the best thing since sliced bread. So I think, you know, I think we all saw through the crap. But what was amazing is that he realized he had to be our friend in order to get bloody elected. And I mean, you know, as we know, during the campaign, it was like the parties were fighting over themselves to sort of be, oh no, we support paid sick days. No, we support paid sick days. No, we support this, we support that. I've never had an election where it's like, you know, people are just fighting over themselves to be as left as they can be. Well, left is in quotes. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that huge difference in 4 years. We have to recognize that. We have to understand that they heard from people how tough it is to bloody survive right now and pay the bills. That has not changed since June the 2nd. the bills that people were paying last week before the elections are the same bills that they're paying this week. So, you know, that difficulty in the grocery stores, the difficulty of getting access to food and to affordable rent is still happening. And so we see it's really important to see those opportunities. As Sarah said, we have a fantastic opportunity to create some trouble and to force people to remember that this government is probably going to, you know, expire those 3 paid sick days. And so that is an excellent chance for us to say, okay, we don't give a shit that you won with the majority. We're going to make sure that you give us paid sick days, whether you like it or not. And I think with the kind of anger and disaffection there is, I think we have an opportunity to do that with. We've got these great slides buzzing on the screen, but I do want to sort of talk about the fact that, you know, it is really important to not just examine things electorally, right? And to just see that, well, the Tories have a majority. I think everyone said they may have a majority seats in the legislature, but, you know, the legislature is in that circle in Toronto. It's not the rest of the province. So if we can just keep them in that building, I'm fine with that. And let's just organize around them. And so I think we have to ask yourself, when you look at your own community and you look at the people that you're working with and that you spent a lot of time organizing and doing outreach with before, like just even in the last 6 months, do you feel more confident? Do you feel more convinced that we are on the right path? Do you feel stronger? Do you feel that you have more of a community than you did 6 months ago? These are all parts of what I would describe as victories, as steps in the organizing process of building a movement. Because we're never going to get the things we want unless we have a strong movement. And frankly, we don't have a strong movement right now. We have the makings of an incredible movement, but we've got still a bloody lot of work to do. But let's look at some of the things that are making us stronger, okay? So, you know, we've got some incredible tech wizards at the office here. And so here's some facts. So just in the last 6 months, over 25,000 people participated in our campaign in some way, either joining in outreach, sending an email, putting up a sign. Like, that's pretty amazing, 25,000 people. Just imagine if we take that 25,000 people and we build that to 50,000, to 75,000, to 100,000. So by the time, you know, it rolls around in 4 years, we have quadrupled the kinds of people who are committed in our movement. And since just even the beginning of this year, 4,000 new people have joined our movement. We've trained over 400 people through workshops and trainings. And in just 25 weeks, we organized over 130 events, workshops, outreaches, meetings, and phone zaps. That's amazing. Like, that's almost like 6 events per week for 25 weeks, right? We had our materials translated in different languages. We had massive amounts of outreach happening within ethnic and language paper communities, like language community media, sorry. And, you know, we had, and I think what's really interesting, and I think the slides say this, in 2018, we were pretty chuffed to have like 31 candidates who had signed the pledge to be a decent work champion. This time we had 85 candidates. So this shows that people know that we're hot stuff, frankly. So we're very sexy right now, but they know that in order to win and in order to be something in their community, that they need to sign on to be a decent work champion because their community recognizes that that's something that's important. So just imagine if we do continue to do this deep organizing for the next 4 years, for the next election, as again, just another marker, because, you know, frankly, I'm not going to wait 4 years. I want to wait. I want to start organizing right now for paid sick days. I'm not going to wait for an election to get that. We never did during the pandemic, so we certainly shouldn't just bloody wait for an election to get what we want. In fact, we should turn on the heat and turn the screws around this government so much that they're going to be sorry that they have a bloody majority, and that they don't want to be responsible for these issues, because we're going to make them. And that's our job, right? Our job is to build the confidence, it's to build the power, it's to build the hope with people in our communities who are pissed off and who are disaffected and frustrated and wondering what the hell to do. That is our job. We have to get out there and do this hard work, but the payoffs are going to be amazing. We've already seen what the payoffs have been just in the last 2.5 months that we've been organizing. And so I think that it is so critical that we do we take all of those conversations that we had during these last 25 weeks and turn them into the goal that they are, which is new people in our movement, new energy, new excitement, new ideas, new outreach, new connections, all of the things that we need to do, not just in one city, but in all of our major cities across the province. And, do the training, the deep organizing, take on bad employers, and use our strength to build this movement. Because, that's what we have, and we are doing a kick-ass job despite the pandemic. And I have no doubt that we're going to succeed. So I'm going to stop right there. But I just wanted to say, great work, everyone. Such hard work. So, let's continue the fight, because you know what? We have no other choice. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Deena. I feel like we've got a lot of tools in our knapsack now, and hopefully will give us lots to reflect on. What we'd like